let's get into focus here. Okay, here we go. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you're tuning into this video. Hope you're doing well. It's Mr. Malzberger here, the phantom voice that you get to hear as I show you about our new unit. Our new unit is probability and statistics. We are going to just start talking about probability. Now, let's see. The most basic thing you need to think about with probability is it's the likelihood of an outcome occurring. We have the likelihood of you being killed by a vending machine. They do that by figuring out how many people die each year being crushed under vending machines because they're so impatient that they didn't get their food that they shake it till it rocks forward and crushes them. And you take that number of people who died that way, which is surprisingly more than you would imagine, divided by the number of people there are in the United States, and that will give you the probability of you dying under a vending machine. There's the likelihood of rain. The probability, that's 20% chance of rain tomorrow. We hear probability all the time. Gambling is all about probability and odds. We're going to start with the most basic probability tool, and that is the coin. Now, this is a Sacagawea dollar coin right here. It's got two sides. The heads, of course, has Sacagawea's head. And on the back, we've got an eagle flying around, and that's the tails. Now, we all know that the chance of getting heads or tails is, we say that's 50-50. There's a 50% chance we get tails, 50% chance we get heads. Now, we could represent that as a percentage, or we could represent that as a fraction. As a fraction, it's, of course, a half. This is the amount of outcomes, which means you can either get heads or tails. This is what happens. Well, so you're either going to get heads or tails. So the bottom is how many possible things can actually happen. You can either get heads or tails. Only one of those things is going to happen, and that is your top fraction. So, of course, if I flip it once, I have a 50-50, 50% chance of getting heads, 50% chance of getting tails. But what happens if I flip it twice? Does that change things? Well, of course it does, because I'm going to have two different things happen. So I'm going to ask a question. I want to know, what's the chance? I just wrote change. What's the chance of getting heads twice? What's the chance of getting two heads? Well, if I flip it, I got a heads. I got it. I actually got exactly what I was looking for. What luck. Well, let's see how hard that is to actually have happen. So on my first flip, I can either get heads or I can get tails. That's it, right? Now my second flip, same thing. I can get heads or tails, but what I actually end up getting depends on what I did first. If I flipped heads first, of course I can get what I got, heads, right? I got two heads, but I could have also gotten tails on that second flip and had heads, tails. If I had gotten tails for the first flip, well, on my second flip could have got heads, and on my second flip I would have got tails. So when I flip the coin two times, instead of there being two outcomes, I now have four. I bet you can figure out what I'm going to ask next. And that is, what happens if I flip a coin one more time and have three flips? Well, the branches continue the same way. This is kind of like a tree map. In fact, it is a tree map. So if I got heads and then heads for the first and second, I could get heads again. Ooh. Or I could get tails on that third flip. If I had gotten heads followed by tails, well, I could get heads on the third flip, or I could get tails. Same thing over here. Tails, heads, heads, or tails, heads, tails. Those are three possible outcomes, or the outcomes with three flips. Or I could have gotten tails, tails, heads, or the very rare tails, tails, tails. Now if we count, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There are 8 possible outcomes. Now, of course, I could draw this tree map every single time, but it's going to get bigger and kind of harder to contain. I'm going to have to plan ahead a little bit more. Like if I wanted to do 4 flips, or I want to do 5 flips, that's a lot of drawing out just for a single problem. So the faster way is to think that each time you flip it, there's 2 possible outcomes. So 4 flips is 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. That's why up here where there's 3 flips, it's 2 times 2 times 2, which is 8. 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8, and 8 times 2 is 16. This is also known as 2 to the 4th power, which is saying I want 2 multiplied 4 times. 1, 2, 3, 4. So instead of having to draw the entire map out, we can just do that. For 5 flips, it's going to be 5 2s all multiplied together. Now the easy shortcut is to say, well, I know 4 2s is 16, so it's just 16 times 2. 16 times 2 is 32, and this is the same as 2 to the 5th power. 5 2s multiplied together. Now the reason why this is much faster than having to draw the entire chart is because this is cumbersome. If I had to do, I'd have to have 32 heads and tails across the bottom. So even just getting up to 5 flips, it says flip, that looks like flips instead of flip 5. 6 flips, of course, is going to be double that, 64, so that's not ever going to fit. Now let's say I did 4 flips, and I wanted to know how many times I'd get at least 3 tails. So the first thing I need to know is what's my possible amount of outcomes? And I already figured out it's 16. 16 is going to be my denominator in whatever fraction. That's how many outcomes I have with 4 flips. So over here I'm going to put that as the bottom of my answer. But now I need to figure out at least 3 tails, means I can get 3 or I could get 4. So what I'm going to do is a little line of 4 letters, and it's going to map out one flip session that would do what I'm looking for, give me 3 tails. So I could get tails, 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 heads. So there's flip 1, 2, 3, and 4. So if I got 3 tails first and then a heads, I got it. So there's one possible way. Of course, I could have gotten tails, 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 and then the final tails, which would be 4, because that's at least 3. It's more. The other possible outcomes, I could get tails, tails. I'm going to move the heads over to the 3rd flip, and have the 4th flip be tails. I'm now going to jump that heads over to the 2nd spot, so tails, heads, followed by 2 tails. And then, of course, I could have gotten heads first, followed by 3 tail flips. So that means there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 possible outcomes that would give me what I'm looking for, at least 3 tails. Now, of course, if I wanted, let's do 3 flips, all heads. Well, 3 flips, I know is 8, because that's 2 times 2 times 2. And there's only one possible outcome that has heads, heads, and heads, so that's 1 out of 8 possible outcomes. And that is basically your type of questions you're going to get with a coin. Now, to increase the amount of possible outcomes, I'm going to go to our friend, the number cube, which we all know as a die or dice when there's multiple. It has 6 sides. 1, 2, 3, 4 is on the other side, 5, and then 6. We know these from all our board games. 6 possible outcomes. So let's see here. Let's flip this over. Let's see through these too much. Thin paper. So if I have 6 possible outcomes, let's roll a die. So let's see. Let's look at what are the possibilities of rolling a 2? What are the possibilities of rolling a 3? What are the possibilities of rolling a 4? What are the possibilities of rolling an even number? What are the possibilities of rolling a 1 or a 2? And then what are the possibilities of rolling a 6? The only number I wrote. Okay. I'm going to give you a second. If you want to pause and go ahead of me and figure out what you think the fractions would be, go for it. But here's what I see. Well, 2 is one possible outcome out of the 6 that there are. 3 is the same thing as 1, 6, because it's just one of the 6 outcomes. That means 4 is the same. Even, well, even numbers are 2, 4, and 6, which are 3 of the possible 6 outcomes. So that's the same as a 1/2 if I simplify. 1 or a 2, well, that's 2 of the outcomes of the possible 6. That simplifies down to a 1/3. And then 6 is just going to be like their buddies over here. 1 out of 6. Now I can combine it and say, oh, I'm going to flip a coin and roll the die. And what that does is it gives me the outcomes that are on the die combined with the outcomes on the coin. Now I'm not going to add them and make 8, because 6 and 2 do make 8 when you add. What I'm going to say is, well, I can flip heads, but then I could get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 with the heads. That's 6 outcomes. Flip that over and I have tails, I can get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 with the tails. That's 6 more outcomes for a total of 12. So a coin plus a die, well, that's 2 possible outcomes times. It's always multiplying when you're combining to get the possible outcomes of 12. So if I wanted to get a heads and a 5, well, that's going to be 1 possible outcome out of 12, right? If I wanted to get tails and an odd, well, that's going to be 1/2 for the tails times 1/2 for the odds, because odds and evens are both going to be a half. So that's a 1/4 possibility. Now things get really tricky, dicey as we may say, if I use 2 different dice. Now, the smallest number I can roll, if I add these together, it's a summative kind of thing, is 2. Snake eyes. The highest I can, of course, roll is 12. So what we're going to do is we're going to look and see what happens. Now, it's the same as the coin and a die. 2 die, or 2 dice, there's 6 outcomes on each one of them. So there are 36 possible outcomes. I'm going to show them all to you right now. It's going to take a second. So 2 to 12, the middle is 7. 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. And then we have 6, 5, 4, 3, and 2. Now, there's only one way to make 2, and that's the snake eyes. So you get 1 and 1. Now, here's the thing about the 3. I can do a 1 and a 2. So black 1, red 2. Or I can do the opposite. So I can have a 1 and a 2, or a 2 and a 1. So there are 36 possible outcomes, which means 2 is just 1 out of 36, whereas 3 is 2 out of 36, which simplifies down to 1 out of 18. 4, of course, is 2 and 2, and then it's going to be 1 and 3, and then 3 and 1. 3 and 1, 1 and 3. So I've got my double, 2, 2, 1 and 3, 3 and 1. So that's 3 possible outcomes out of the 36, which simplifies down to 1 out of 12. 5, of course, doesn't have a double, but I have 1 and 4. 4 and 1. I've got 2 and 3. And 3 and 2. For 4 out of 36 possible outcomes, or 1 and 9. So as we're building up, we're getting into there's more possible ways to make these numbers. 6, of course, has a double, which is 3 and 3. Then it has 1 and 5. So, of course, it has this 5 and 1. And it's going to have a 2 and 4 and 4 and 2 for 5 possible outcomes out of 36. I can't simplify that. 7, and I'm going to tell you right now, it is the center of this number span here of all the possible outcomes. It's going to have the most. So I'm going to start with 1 and 6. And so, of course, I have 6 and 1. I can have 2 and 5 and 5 and 2. And then I can have 3 and 4 and 4 and 3 for a total of 6 out of 36. That is a 1 out of 6 chance of rolling a 7 when you roll 2 dice at the same time. Now what you're going to see is this makes a triangle. We're going to start climbing back up with the exact same fractions. 8, of course, has 4 and 4. It can't do a 1 because there's no 7, so it's going to be 2. Oops. I'll do 6 and 2 first. And then 2 and 6. I can have 3 and 5 and 5 and 3 for 5 out of 36 possible outcomes. So we're going right back. So this one, of course, is going to be 4 because you've got smallest number is 3 with the 6. And we've got 6 and 3. We've got 4 and 5, 5 and 4, making 4 out of 36, which is 1/9 again. And it's just going to keep going down quickly here. We've got 5 and 5, 4 and 6, and 6 and 4, making 3 out of 36, or 1 out of 12. Getting down to the very bottom here, 5 and 6, and 6 and 5 for 2 out of 36, or 1 out of 18. And then, of course, the odds that you're not going to get 1 out of 36 for the 12s. These are the possible outcomes for rolling 2 dice. The way I try and remember it, of course, drawing all this out is time consuming. You never want to do that on a problem. You do need to remember that it's 36 total. You could do this. If you always remember that 7, there's 6 ways to make a 7. Then whatever number it is you need to make, you can go either way because it's going to go down to 5 and 5. So if you needed to figure out 9, you'd say, well, 7 is 6, 8 is 5, so 9 is 4. So all you have to really remember is that 7 has 1 less, and then it branches out. Of course, if you needed to know 3, you could say, well, that's just going to be 1 more than 2, which is 2. So, yeah. I've got some problems for you to practice. There we go. So pause the video and solve all 10 of these problems, and then we'll get back to it and see how you did. Okay, we're back. You hopefully know exactly what's going on. All right, so we're flipping a coin for the first one 3 times. So that's 2 times 2 times 2, which is 8. So everything's going to be out of 8. Getting at least 2 tails, 3 flips. Okay, so I could get tails, tails, heads, tails, heads, tails, or heads, tails, tails. So that's 3 out of 8 for A. Getting 3 heads, well, there's only heads, heads, heads. So that's 1 out of 8. Getting only 1 tail, well, that's going to be tails, heads, 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 tails in the middle, heads, and heads, heads, tails. Those are the 3 possible ways, so it's 3 again. Okay, second chunk. You roll a single die, number cube. What is the chance you roll a 4? Well, there's 6 sides on a die, so everything's out of 6. 4 is 1 out of 6. An even number, that's 2, 4, and 6, so 3 out of 6, or 1/2. 5 or a 6, that's 2 out of the 6 outcomes, or 1/3 of the outcomes. Prime number. Okay, that's 1, 2, 3, 4 is 2 times 2, and then 5, 6 is 2 times 3. So 4 out of 6, or 2 out of 3. Okay, now I'm rolling 2 dice. What is the chance of rolling a 6, 12, or a 7? It's 6 times 6, so 36 is my outcome. We're looking at 6. Well, let's see. 7 had 6, so 6 would have 5. So 5 out of 36. 12 is the hardest one to get, so there's 1 of them out of 36. And 7 is 6 out of 36. All right. So this, of course, has a homework set for you to do. You'll notice that these lessons aren't going to be quite as long without having to worry about SBAC, which I don't think we're going to make it back in time for. We have a lot of extra time to finish these units up here. So here you go. Here's your online homework number 2. This will be due Monday. Yeah, due Monday. All right, you guys take care.